We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to all of you for joining. My name is Lisa Gear, and I'm the Dean of Admissions here at Southwestern. I'm going to go ahead and let two other of our admissions officers say a brief hello and introduce themselves, and then we will get right to it. Nancy?
Hi, my name is Nancy Rojas Hill. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at Southwestern. I'm currently checking everyone in, so welcome. Good to see some familiar names. But I will also be joining the chat later to address any questions that you have as they come up there.
Hey, Julie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Spencer. I'm Assistant Director of Admissions here at Southwestern. I too will be in the chat. I already see there's tons of questions. Bear with me. I'm going to get to them one by one until Nancy's able to join. I've been in admissions for about 6-7 years now. I love it. Southwestern is awesome, supportive. I hope you'll see that tonight. If you have any questions at any point beyond this, feel free to reach out. We'll have our emails in the chat later.
Julie also is our part-time program liaison and works really closely with the Scale office as well. So if any of you are considering either or both of those two programs, you'll probably be in touch with Julie at some point. And Fabiola and Brittany, did you guys want to say a quick hello? Fabiola?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Fabiola Martinez. I'm a 2L, and I'm just here. If you have any questions, I can also put my email in the chat, and I'm open for you all.
Thank you, Fabiola. Brittany?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Butler. I'm a 3L traditional day student. I'm in my final year, as Lisa said, and I can also put my email in the chat as well, and I'm here to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to try and make this as interactive as possible, but I will forewarn you, I do have quite a bit of slides to show you, and some of the information is going to be a little detail oriented, which is hopefully what you came here for, but just bear with me. Some of the slides I'll give you a little bit more time to read. Some of it is content directly that comes from the LSAC website in various places. So that's where kind of a lot of this nitty gritty stuff is going to exist, but I want to give you a chance to take a look at that if you haven't yet seen it. So tonight we're going to focus on the Credential Assembly Service, also known as the CAS report. This makes up one of the 2 electronic documents that we receive when you submit your application to our law school, or really any law school. It's a primary part of the application file, and it's obviously very important. These are the various different types of things that we are able to review in your CAS report. So we have the banner sheet, which is literally the front cover sheet. It has things like your LSAT score, undergraduate GPA, and sort of a breakdown and summary of your undergraduate work. It will have notes from your transcripts, if you've applied previously, if there's any kind of misconduct or irregularity flag. Then the next part of the document would include any electronic copies of the transcripts that you've submitted, including, of course, any foreign transcript evaluation that you've also participated in. There's going to be the LSAT writing sample. And then lastly are the letters of recommendation. Now, not all schools require letters of recommendation, so that may vary from school to school. The writing sample is required. At Southwestern, we do require at least 1 letter of rec, and 3 is the maximum. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each of these things now. Okay, so the banner sheet is really one, 8.5 by 11 sheet that has a lot of things on it. So just for the ease of your eyes and being able to kind of get a better sense of what's on it, we've broken it up. But if you can just imagine, it's one continuous document of different pieces of information. So on this document, we get a quick glance at a lot of different things about you. So we know, your state of permanent residence, we know your gender, your age, your ethnicity. We can see what your major is. In this upper right-hand corner, we have the institutions that you've attended. Now, you are required to submit any undergraduate transcripts that you have, including even like community college coursework that you took, even if you were a high school student. Those are all part of your undergraduate record, even if you weren't necessarily in college yet. Anything that you enroll in, any school, any program, anything else, after the time that your bachelor's degree is conferred is technically considered graduate work. And if you do submit those transcripts, which we would definitely suggest that you do, but it's not required, they would also be listed here under the institutions attended. The little arrow that's on the side over here, this is that notes from the transcript. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that later, but this is that initial sort of flag that we're able to see. Okay, so the middle of this banner sheet, there's a lot of nitty gritty, and I'm going to bounce over to what is the bottom of the slide in just 1 second to give you some additional context for what I have highlighted in the blue. But here in the very middle part, and you'll see I have semester hours and GPA kind of identified. We've got the years that I've put the orange block around, the cum across GPA that's circled in red. These are all really important things. So I'm going to go over one slide and then I'll come right back to this one. So at the bottom of the slide, or excuse me, at the bottom of the banner sheet is where we will see your LSAT scores. So this CAS report does come from a couple years ago before there was such a thing as the flex, but it for the most part looks exactly the same. They haven't made any other changes. If you are a flex taker, I put in red there just as kind of a placeholder. That's what it would look like to denote for us that you took the flex. And then in the little key where you see like A is absent delay, C is candidate cancel, right down here, there's a little asterisk and it just says LSAT flex. So it just lets us know at a very quick sort of at a glance that you were a flex taker versus a non-flex taker. This particular sample is a non-flex, it's a standard LSAT, but I wanted just to kind of show you what that would look like. So I circled the 45 there, or rather it's a rectangular blue box. And let's go back one slide. That's the thing I wanted to draw your attention to. So this person had a high of a 150 and the percent rank was a 45. So back here on this slide, the little blue box is a little too far to the left. You can't see that whole thing. But what that tells us is if we ever have any uncertainty about the degree school that you went to, or if maybe it's not as, popular as the other feeder schools that we might normally see, this gives us a really quick indication. What it means is that little bar, that range just says 45 to 49. And that tells us that 5, which is the number right below it, okay, so that 45 to 49, if you remember, that's the percentile rank for the LSAT score. It fits right into that little band. 5% of the people of that school scored, in the bottom 36 or the top 36 of that exam. So it gives us just a quick glance at how you did on the LSAT compared to your peers from the same degree school over 3 years. That's the period of time. And so literally it's 36 is the total of these numbers that are higher than it. So it's really just quick and simple. So moving on to that transcript analysis part in the middle, the semester hours that I have the little purple arrow pointing over to also gives us some context to tell us those are the credit hours that you took each of those years. It lets us know, again, at a quick glance, are you taking a lot of units and you did really well? Did you only take 2 units, right? Or in the case of this last record, 7 units right at the end, just in 17 for one semester. It gives us that context just with that. Before we even read the actual transcript, we can see how you did relative to the course load that you took. What the green arrow is pointing to is how you did in those respective units for each of those years. And then it just kind of continues to build. There's lots of other things there that you can also see. There's the cum GPA from the college. There's a cum GPA percentile rank. And then ultimately we get this cum across GPA, what I've circled in the red, the 2.86. So now I'm going to go to the next slide and just show you a little bit about that. So if you look at the undergraduate summary there, it does happen to match the degree summary GPA, and it's the same number of units. That's not always true, and I'll have an example for you later in the presentation of how that could be different. But what happens is LSAC does a GPA calculation, and that's what we're going to spend the next few slides kind of going into. And this will give you a sense of how it could be different and where you can find what your GPA is that's been calculated for you. Okay, so the next few slides, you're going to get a little bit of time to read these. But basically, LSAC does this GPA calculation to put everything on a standard 4.0 system. And that's important because not all schools are on the same grading scale. And so this helps kind of create this uniformity across our applicants. It is the official GPA that all law schools use. And then I put a link down there. You probably won't be able to copy the whole thing down, but if you just know that you're going to lsac.org and you can find all of this subsequent information that I'm about to share, they have it all broken down for you there. Okay, so these are things that are excluded from the conversion. So again, there's a lot of information here. I don't expect you to read it all, but I'll give you a minute or so to make the attempt. So important things I kind of just underlined for you, they do not convert things like withdrawals, incompletes, things that are noted if they were remedial, those that are any grades that are awarded after your bachelor's degree has already been received. They don't calculate things that are assigned for non-credit courses, all sorts of different things here. So there's a lot. This is really sort of the technical, but I wanted you to kind of get a sense of the different things that are not part of the calculation. Many things are obviously, but these are some of the things that are not. Okay. These are how they handle the various different other types of things. This is not to say that they are not part of the conversion. That was a separate slide. So failing grades, any grade notation that signifies failure is converted to a 0. So these would actually be held against you in terms of the calculation. Then there are repeated courses. If the grades do appear individually, they do take the average of those grades. So that means if you took calculus and you got an F, and then you took calculus again and you got an A, if both of those grades show up on your transcript, then both of those grades would be calculated into the calculation. Okay, and then there's a whole little section here on academic renewal and academic forgiveness. This is definitely something, you know, as you might be skimming through some of this information, I want to encourage all of you to make sure you get a copy of all of the transcripts that you're submitting. You want to know what is on them. This is exactly the same sort of concept as getting your credit report and making sure that everything on your credit report is true and factual. All the time we get information or emails from applicants and they say, oh, you know, I happened to just look at it and there's, you know, I did withdraw from these classes and they're saying I didn't. And even though it might not necessarily be counted against them in the calculation, it could set off some sort of red flag if there are a series of W's. So I don't want you to interpret the information here about what is or isn't calculated as sort of a rule, if you will, about what you should or shouldn't address in your application. Just because something may not be part of the grade calculation doesn't mean it may not set off some other kind of red flag that you should address. So you want to always take kind of a step back from your application materials, look at it, you know, as objectively as you possibly can. And if you think there might be a concern or a question about your grades or your grade trends or what happened in a particular semester, maybe it's changing of majors, maybe something was going on, whatever it is, you know, do yourself the favor by addressing it in an addendum. Okay. So here's a little bit just about in general about the policy about converting the grades. It's pretty straightforward, I think. So it's important to realize that because LSAC does have, you know, these various policies about what they do or don't consider in the calculation, you will want to, you know, again, make sure you know what the GPA is that's being used for your file review. And, you know, if it's higher, so an example of where the GPA, the calculated GPA could be higher would include, say, for example, if you took community college courses those community college courses are rarely, if ever, calculated into your transferring into schools, your degree granting schools, GPA calculation. Generally speaking, they give you credit for those courses. Maybe you fulfilled, certain prerequisites, those types of things, but you don't get to take those grades over with you. They generally start you off at that, at a 0 GPA, and you build up, from there. What LSAC does, though, is they'll take that 1 or 2 years worth of community college credits, or however many you might have, and they will factor those in. So if you did do really well in community college, it's going to benefit you in this calculation. On the flip side, and we do sometimes see this, is if you maybe weren't ready for school, maybe you didn't have the right work ethic, maybe you were just kind of floundering, and maybe those grades reflect it, you might have soared by the time you got to your 4-year university and really found your stride. And now, unfortunately, that GPA is probably going to take a hit because it's going to be pulled down by the community college courses, or at least in my example. So it definitely can go up or down. I've had many students be surprised by how different it can be. Okay. So every once in a while, there is no GPA calculation. For the most part, it happens with foreign students, but it can also happen if you have 60 units, or they need at least 60 units of US or Canadian coursework in order to be part of the calculation. So every once in a while, we don't get that. It's nothing necessarily to be alarmed at. We do get the actual transcripts, and it does go into the holistic review process, but it is possible there could be no GPA. Okay, course credits. Again, this is just the technical stuff that LSAC applies to their process. Credits are reported in terms of semester hours. This kind of goes back to, I think it was the purple arrow on the CAS banner sheet that I was showing you. Okay, so academic notes. This is the thing I mentioned we would come back to. It shows up at the top of the banner sheet, and it could say things there like academic honors. It could say also things like probation or dismissal or some other types of flags. The really important thing well, there's a lot of important things about that, but probably the most important takeaway is what we have listed here in purple, because nearly every law school, and I know Southwestern certainly, this is true for us, requires that you answer character and fitness questions on the application. And the scope of those questions is probably where you're going to find the variety from school to school. But for the most part, we are asking things about, if you've ever had any criminal activity, charges, arrests, whatnot. There's also the section on your academic performance, if you've ever been on probation or been dismissed or been suspended, et cetera. And all too often, students will say no to that. And, they might have forgotten that they had a semester or so that they were on academic probation. But then we are flagged about it because we see it on the academic notes section of this CAS report. And it can snowball. So as a courtesy, we generally give students the opportunity to amend their response to the application. But please know that is a courtesy. It's not necessarily something that we do in every instance, and it's not something we are required to do. The reference there to misconduct or irregularity, I mentioned that's something that could show up also on the CAS. It basically shows up as Y or N, is that if you did not answer the question correctly and a school sees that you did in fact have something on your academic notes that was, say, probation, the school could submit something to LSAC for a misconduct or irregularity investigation. And it's important to know that that investigation does not consider your intention. So it might have been just a really simple oversight. You may just not have remembered. You may have not realized that that was even ever on there. It could have been from 20 years ago. There's a lot of things about that could potentially be explained away, but unfortunately, intention is not a factor. So it can snowball, and if it is determined that there was a misconduct or irregularity, That will show up on your CAS report. It will be part of your permanent record with LSAC. Any law school you have ever applied to or ever will apply to will also be made known of that. Now, of course, it's up to those law schools then to decide what they want to do with it. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to get admitted to a law school. It will, of course, come down to the severity of the situation. But it just is something that you would want to avoid. That's the long and short of it. There's no need to go down this path. And again, if you are getting copies of your transcripts, these are things that you can avoid. Okay, so many of you have asked admissions offices all over the country, you know, how we're interpreting your spring or summer or even fall 2020 grades because of COVID. So this is a copy of the letter that LSAC is putting in CAS reports. I've seen it several times already. To be honest, I'm not sure if it's only going in the files of the students who have been earning grades in these semesters, or if it's included even in files where students have completed their degrees years ago. But at least we know for students that are completing, this is the letter that we get. So it's just to kind of keep everybody mindful of, the various different grading systems that undergraduate schools decided to go with this during this pandemic, and that, we should give students a little bit more benefit of the doubt with that. So just thought you guys might want to see what that looks like. Okay, so here's an example of a cumulative GPA that is lower than the degree GPA. So you can see in this person's sample, at the green arrow, their college GPA across the mean was a 3.17. Their degree summary GPA, so this is their degree granting school, it would have been 2 up from the GPA college mean, is a 3.22, but their cumulative GPA is a 2.99. So just quickly looking back, I can see, a period there from 06 where their GPA was only at 2.6, and then subsequently a 2.46, and then it went down further to a 2.34. So I can see that there's this middle block there in their academic record, earlier on, where they didn't perform so well, and they ended up, really being able to pick it up. And especially by the time they graduated, they were able to bring their semester GPAs up to, over a 3.6. So they definitely would be a case of an upward trend. But this happens, and generally speaking, students are a little bit surprised to know that this happens. So I wanted you all to be able to kind of see how it plays out. Okay, so this is where you can go to see what GPA has been calculated for you. So you're going to go to your online profile with LSAC. You're going to go to the academic summary report. Then you're going to go to transcripts. Okay, before we go on to the LSAT writing sample and letters of rec, are there any questions that you all have that you want to tackle live? Sedona, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just really quickly wanted to ask, how does LSAC differentiate between your degree GPA and your cumulative? Is the cumulative only from your university grades? How do they know the difference?
It's the opposite. So your degree is your four-year university graduating GPA, and it's usually, I think, what you see on your transcripts. The cumulative GPA is everything. So if you've only gone to one school, and you've never had grades replaced, you've never taken classes over, that type of thing, then it's definitely common to see the GPA for both be exactly the same, or sometimes it can just be ever so slightly different. But the big differences between them, whether it goes up or down, that's usually because there's another set of grades from another school that's being added in.
Okay, and then what would you suggest? My degree GPA is significantly lower than the one given to me from my university. And I was just wondering, I think it has something to do with the conversions because ASU does go above a 4.0 scale, and that might be part of it. Is that something that we should address in an addendum if it's significantly different by like, you know, if it like, for
Is
instance,
it tenths different?
no, and yes, but
Yes.
significantly, like almost an entire points difference.
I would probably address it in an addendum. I regardless of where you're seeing those dips, I would probably address it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Lisa, there were a few questions throughout the chat about what a Canadian and a foreign transcript will look like on that cover sheet. Can you
So the
summarize really
Canadian ones look identical. They just give us the information and it'll say the Canadian school. So that's been true for many years now that LSAC is able to do the Canadian schools. Foreign would be basically anybody that's not from the US and not Canadian. And for the most part, we accept a foreign transcript evaluation. There's a service through LSAC, that's our preference, because it does come as part of the CAS report. And then basically what we see on that is it'll say the name of the school. It will say, you know, when you attended there. It will give us some sort of relation. So it will probably take, you know, the grades that you earned, and they run it through a third-party system themselves, and it'll tell us, you know, in more of a narrative, is this like above average or below average, or, you know, that type of thing. It doesn't give us a GPA in place of the foreign work, but it does give us an idea of how well you did. And then most importantly, it tells us whether or not you have received your undergraduate degree. You should also be able, or your equivalency, you should be able to also see this foreign version in your academic record on your LSAC profile. I will say for the past couple years, I have noticed that some schools in some countries, it has only been indicating like 3 years worth of a bachelor's program, not the full 4 years. And then when the student has submitted their foreign transcripts to a different third party, and we have a list on our website, they were able to identify the equivalency. So I'm not exactly sure why this may happen, but it does sometimes happen. So it's definitely something that applicants should be mindful of and be looking out for on their online profile as well, just to make sure that that degree equivalency is there, because we do require the bachelor's degree. Kionda?
Yes, but my name is Keandra. But,
Oh, Keandra, I'm sorry, I missed a letter there.
thank you. My question is, I'm looking at my CAS report, but my question is, where would you? Because I've been trying to figure this out too, as far as like where would you find? I see where like my GPA is and my cumulative GPA, but like where would like I have a graduate degree, and so will those things like any? I don't know where to look for that. Will that information not be provided?
So anything from your graduate record is just going to be the copy of the transcript. It's not going to give us any breakdown in the grades. It's not going to be part of any calculation. So it's just literally the PDF copy of the transcript you submit, they give to us in the file. The only GPA calculation you'll see is anything up into the point your bachelor's degree was conferred.
Okay.
And it should be under academic records and then transcripts.
So I should be able to see it, like, because I don't see it. So that's why I keep wondering. And I know that it got delivered. So I should be able to click on it and it should pop up.
You should see it. I mean, I don't know how long it's been since your transcripts arrived to LSAC. It does take, you know, there is a process that they have to go through. So if it's just arrived, maybe they haven't finished it yet, I would suggest you contact LSAC directly, because that's where you should be able to see it.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. Nana?
Yes, right here.
Hi.
Thank you for getting my name right. I'm so happy about that.
I try, but don't worry about ever correcting either.
Yes, I was wondering, so as for the information given so far with cumulative GPA, I was wondering if that would also applies with fellow universities as well, because I started at one university then transferred to another, would I need to contact both schools for
Yes.
GPAs? Yes, I would. Okay, and then I was also wondering for letters of recommendation. I'm looking at that section right now. So would my recommenders need an LSAC account to?
They do not, no. There's an online link you send them. They submit their letter back through the link and they do not need an account.
Oh, perfect. And
You should be able to see though,
Mhm.
once their letters are submitted, you should see something, you know, that identifies their name or something of that nature. And then you should have the ability to target which letters go to what schools, so long as you've met the requirement that the school has about numbers of letters and whatnot.
Mhm. And finally, the letter you had earlier about the LSAC CAS cases for students in 2000, students for 2020, because I just graduated. I was wondering, where would I have access to that letter?
I don't know that you do have access. That's why I wanted to show it to you. That's something that we see when we get your electronic CAS reports.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Keandra, did you have another question or is your hand still raised from earlier?
From earlier, I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I'll lower it for you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the presentation now. Okay, so we have the LSAT writing sample. This is required. Now, of course, if you're taking the LSAT Flex, you would be doing the writing sample also remotely, but do note that the writing sample is separate from the test date that you do your LSAT Flex. So this has been the same for the past year or so, actually closer to 2 years now. The LSAT, the standard LSAT had gone to a tablet version in July of 2019. And at that time, they split apart the writing sample from what had been previously the paper-based version of the test. And so since that time, since July 19, the writing sample has been something you do separately. So I think you can start it with it after 24 hours of the LSAT itself or the LSAT Flex. And it is required. You do need to have at least one writing sample in your CAS report. So you do not have to take it each and every time, but you do need to have one or your CAS report will not be released to the law schools that you're applying to. This also applies if you took a standard or rather non-LSAT Flex. So if you have an actual handwritten LSAT writing sample, or if you took one from July 19 through February of 20, basically pre-pandemic. If you took one of the tablet-based versions, then that writing sample counts as the one that you technically need to have. You are, of course, welcome to include additional LSAT writing samples, but you are only required to have one. And that's an LSAC rule. That's not school to school. The reason why schools use the LSAT writing sample and why it's even part of this whole equation is it's just, you know, our only opportunity to see how you might write under a timed setting where you don't have an opportunity to perfect the statement, you know, which you do with the personal statement or diversity statement or, you know, those other optional essays that you might submit in the application. So you do have some, you know, some options here that you wouldn't have had in the paper-based version. You do have things like spell check. You can sort of rearrange your text a little bit because you have some basic word processing functions. But the most important thing that I would suggest that you keep in mind about the LSAT writing sample is don't overly worry about which angle you take. It doesn't matter which side you advocate for. It just matters the strength of your argument. So that's what you want to focus on. So take a little bit of time. I think you still have the option to have, you know, some scratch paper. You do have to show your scratch paper to the proctors because it is a live proctor, even though you're taking the exam, you know, from your home and your computer, somebody is watching. So you do have to show that. And if you don't show that, it can, you know, cause some delays in getting everything wrapped up. So you can still kind of make some notes and get your thoughts together. But because you have this option to still, you know, copy, paste, move things around, you can forego the scratch paper if you don't need it. Okay, so letters of recommendation, I think, are probably one of the most important portions of the application. So of course we know that your grades are really important and your LSAT is also very important. That combination will dictate much of how your application is perceived by each law school. But for many of you, you're going to have similar LSAT and GPAs to other applicants. And this, the letters of rec and your personal statement are really going to be the ways that you differentiate yourself. So letters of recommendation are challenging for many reasons, not the least of which is because you don't know what's going to be written. Most students do waive their right to the letters. That is something we recommend. It makes the recommenders feel a little bit more comfortable about what they may be saying. But what you can do, though, is to make sure that, you have used the best judgment possible when choosing your recommenders. It's really, based on the strength of your relationships. Okay, so you should all have, I think it's under your participants little bar, you should all have the ability to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So we have 2 slides here with some samples from letters of recommendation that I want you to be able to see. So for this slide, would you say, using thumbs up for effective or thumbs down for ineffective, would you say that these samples from A to D are effective, thumbs up, or ineffective, thumbs down? Do you all see how to do that on your participants window? Okay, well, I'm seeing a couple responses. Hopefully you don't mind being called on. I'm going to ask some of you to explain maybe why you chose what you did. Okay, so Anne Grambush.
Yes, hi.
Hi, you said that you thought these were effective. Can you give an example or explain why you thought so?
Yeah, so I thought it was effective because they did talk about, a lot of them talked about their actual work. And even though one said it was their niece, they did say they observed her like actually working as a file clerk. So it wasn't just kind of like based on, I guess, opinion. It was like, okay, well, they had like examples of how they exhibited work and how they exhibited growth and constructive criticism. So I gave it a thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you. Christopher Lewis.
Hi there. So
hi, you indicated that you thought these were ineffective. Can you explain why?
I would actually like to kind of compartmentalize here a little bit.
Okay.
I actually thought the only 2 that I really thought were truly ineffective were A and C. For C especially, I stopped reading after I saw niece. I'm sorry if I was working in an admissions process and I saw that somebody couldn't find a better recommender than somebody that they're related to, regardless of if this person works in the field or not, I don't really think that they could be truly objective.
Okay.
So I had that problem with C, and A, that kind of just felt like something that most college professors who are very lazy recommenders would say. Jokes aside, that is how I feel. I mean, like, even if this wasn't true, the school can probably tell because we know that all of our schools seeing our CS reports are going to see your cumulative GPA and your grades. I mean, like, chances are, especially if like we said before, you're going to have very similar applications. This is something that would be said probably of a lot of recommenders, so it wouldn't stand out to me that much.
Okay, so you think A and B were the
A and B and
effective.
C- A and C were ineffective, and then B and D were,
Oh, I'm sorry, you thought A was ineffective also.
yes.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody disagree about A? Does anybody think that A is effective that wants to jump in?
Yeah, I think if a professor has been teaching for 20 years and says, yeah, easily like one of the top 10 students I've ever had, that's not even top 10%. That's pretty notable. I know if I was told that by a professor, I would definitely be thinking, wow, they must really like me. And I don't think they just say that about anyone. So I definitely wouldn't go as far to say this is completely ineffective.
Okay. All right, let's look at the next ones. Okay, who would like to volunteer if you think these are effective or ineffective?
Hi.
Hi.
So I think they're all pretty effective because they really go in depth in explaining like what that student did and giving examples like a 20-page term paper. So I feel like the professor or whoever's writing it really remembers the student and they like really stood out to them. So I would say
Okay.
they're pretty effective.
Do you think with the same sort of effectiveness in F, where it says applicant is my mentee, I have known applicants since their high school years when their father, my neighbor, introduced me to them. I find them to be earnest and congenial.
So from these three, I feel like F is like the least effective, and then D and E are like a little bit more effective than F. Just because F is like again, like someone they kind of already knew, and it's not someone they met like from a classroom or a counselor or something like that.
Okay. Heather, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think actually all three are ineffective. The first one, it's their grade. You can get that from a transcript. The second one, it's not about them. It's about the student. And so they've kind of gone on and on about their own information. And then the third one, kind of like we just said, the fact that he just said that the family, it's a family friend, they're neighbors, you've kind of discounted them again. So I think all three are ineffective.
Okay. Nana?
I would actually like to argue that I think D is the most effective of the three, because looking at the grades the students have received from the past, B plus to B to A, I mean, sure, B to B plus, I mean, B plus to B, it's a slight shift down, but I think overall those grades show that he has grown academically and will be able to grow academically, and then along with understanding and writing in the law school.
Okay. Shilpa?
Hi, I would say D is effective.
I'm sorry, D is effective or ineffective? Shilpa, if you put yourself on mute.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it's the first one is effective.
Okay.
The very last one is also effective. I know it starts going on. The first one is academic. The last one could be character. It starts off by saying that they are a neighbor to me. Their dad introduced them, but I'm thinking that perhaps that's not the entire letter, and they will go into other characteristics that they know of the person that will make them a successful student at a law school. The middle one, I think, talks more about the professor than the student, so that's definitely not effective. So I think D and F, they both are. It's just two different things. One's academic, the other one's more character.
Okay. Gabe?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think they're all three ineffective. I think E is for the reasons that everybody previously stated. I think D does show good academic progress, but it's difficult because it doesn't give you grades relative to other students in the classroom. Maybe this was just a professor being pretty effective, or a lot of people got A's or B pluses on these papers. So it doesn't really give you a very wide scope of success. And then F isn't effective. I think it's just because the words earnest and congenial are a little bit too vague. And while they are good qualities, they're not necessarily specific qualities as to why somebody would be a good student in law school.
Okay. Well, I'm inclined to agree with some of what I've heard. Not everything, and I'll give you a little bit of my reasoning. So I agree with those that think that F in this page that we're on currently here is ineffective. And I think, you know, Shilpa's point is well taken. Maybe there was other information that the person could have shared that might have otherwise, you know, spoken to how this person could have performed academically. But sometimes this is kind of the entirety of a letter of recommendation that we might see. And generally speaking, if somebody doesn't actually know you, and this can come in the form of many different ways, you know, sometimes applicants will ask, you know, if their parent or grandparent knows a judge, or, you know, something that they feel might look really great on paper, they sometimes will kind of lean more heavily on that person's title than they should. And what they end up, you know, producing for us is a waste of the real estate. You know, the person chose to ask a letter from somebody who didn't really have anything meaningful to say, and it's a waste of an opportunity. And, you know, in the larger scheme does show poor judgment. Same thing goes with the one about the niece, regardless of them being able to speak about them from a legal standpoint, it is still a family tie. And that is one rule I don't think you should break. You should not have a family member write on your behalf. If you happen to be fortunate enough to have experience working with a family member or at a family firm, someone else there can probably also speak to your abilities and your work ethic, and that would be a better person to ask than the family member directly. And everything else basically that people are saying, I think, is valuable because it kind of points to the subjectivity of this process, and how we interpret things sometimes is very similar to one another, and sometimes is very different. I think we all pretty much agreed that E here is, you know, the recommender is just spending, you know, the majority of the letter talking about themselves. That is not uncommon. You know, I don't know exactly how you avoid having somebody do this, but I think the better prepared you make your recommender to talking about certain things that you have made sure you want them to talk about, you know, the less likely they're going to fill the space talking about themselves. And if they do so, at least you know that there's going to be more information about you than there is about them. Nancy or Julie, did you guys want to chime in anything about the letters of recommendation that you would want to share with the group?
Yeah, this is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Nancy from the admissions office.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Fellow Nancy. Sorry if I look shrouded in darkness. The sun set and my light source went away. But I just wanted to ask, or I just wanted to note, actually, someone in the chat said that these last three were too emotional to be effective. And I just thought that was a really interesting comment, because in some ways, yes, there can be emotion tied into a letter, particularly if it's from like a longtime mentor or a family member, that makes the reader discount the value of the letter. But I think there's also sometimes a use of emotion in letters of recommendation that is effective. And that's not the recommender saying like, I'm just so happy and pleased with this person all the time. You know, it's actually, you can get the sense through concrete examples that they're stating about the applicant and other ways that this person really is invested in the applicant and is quite happy and, you know, glad to be writing this letter that will help them along their career. So emotion itself is not necessarily a bad thing to have in the letter. But again, there are effective and ineffective uses of it.
Thank you, Nancy. Julie, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I feel like everybody's covered everything, but just to reiterate, and then some of the questions too in the chat, asking somebody that really knows you and your work product and character, that is going to go farther than a fancy name. And I just want to reiterate that. That's it, really.
Thank you. Okay, that's going to take us to our...
Dean Gear, if I may.
Hold on 1 second, please. I'll take questions in a minute.
Well, it was not a question. I just wanted to comment on what we were talking about right now, unless you'd like for me to wait.
If you could wait, please. I have another slide I'd like to share.
Okay.
Okay, so here are our top 5 tips for letters of recommendation. We've mentioned some of this already. Many of you often wonder about, getting an academic letter versus a professional letter. The general rule of thumb is if you're within about 2 years from college or another type of graduate program, our expectation is that you get an academic letter. Sometimes that is still not feasible. That for us, that is not a penalty, but just know that that is our expectation. Choose someone that knows you. That's really important. We really can't underscore that enough. Whether or not it's the professor or the TA, or it's your supervisor, or even sometimes if it's a coworker, depending upon the nature of your work product and things that they've been able to observe, it's really important that somebody be able to know you and to know you well. Number 3, choose strong, timely recommenders. Many of you are at the early sort of portion of this application cycle, and you have an opportunity to be a little bit more thoughtful, hopefully, about who you ask to write your letters on your behalf. You want to make sure that they can do so, by asking 3 really simple questions. Would they be willing to write a letter of recommendation? Would they be able to submit it? My tip here is within at least 6 weeks before you plan to apply. And then 3, and most importantly, would their letter be positive? Would it be an endorsement? You can ask these questions, in the form of a meeting. That is generally what I advise. Ask the potential recommenders to sit down with you. If they're not even willing to sit down and make even a Zoom appointment with you or a phone appointment, then they're probably not going to be able to produce the kind of letter with the type of positive endorsement that you need. Choose someone that can accentuate your accomplishments. If you've been part of a program at your school, or if you've been selected for certain projects at work because of your, great skill set and your leadership qualities, it's perfectly acceptable and encouraged that you ask those recommenders to highlight some of those things on your behalf. And know that just because schools allow you to submit a certain number doesn't mean you need to reach that. So we require 1, we will accept up to 3. But if you have 1 stellar letter versus 3 mediocre, your 1 stellar letter would have been a better bet, in our opinion. So be thoughtful about all of that. Okay, so I'm going to leave the tip slide up for another minute here. And we had a series of questions also flagged, or comments at least. So I'm just going to go in order. Sedona?
I'm sorry, I actually had it up from a question that was already answered in the chat.
Oh, okay, no problem. Richard, you're up.
Yes, okay, thank you. I apologize, but on the previous screen, where you had, I noticed, first of all, I agree with, for the most part, what everyone has said regarding E and F, as far as being ineffective for the most part. And on D, I feel that it can be effective, but a slight twist. I think Nana had spoken to the fact that it shows growth, like from the B plus up to an A on the last paper. The only thing I noticed, and I would like to hear, of course, your take on this. Another gentleman had said that, or maybe it was a young lady, I apologize, but someone had spoken and said that this could pretty much be taken from a transcript, I guess, as far as the grades, and that's true to a certain extent. But the last part of that, where the recommender says his 20-page term paper, so on and so forth, I think that that shows a little more detail that the recommender is saying about the applicant, that to me can make a difference as far as it just being like the same information that someone could pull from a transcript. And maybe the recommender has a more intimate knowledge of that applicant. And so I feel that it could be positive for that reason as well. It's not just saying, you know, grades, it's saying, because from my understanding, a CAS report won't have a 20-page term paper and so on and so forth. It will just have the grade. Could that make a difference if your recommender be a little more specific, and like on the last slide you were just showing, like perhaps accentuate that individual?
Sure, and I think you're definitely hitting a key point there. You know, this recommender is choosing to break down not only the grades received on each of these, you know, papers that were submitted, but also the topics. And so I think it was purposeful. You know, it probably started with this particular recommender being selected in the first place, that the applicant felt like the course material was applicable to their application for law school and their desire to go to law school. And then when you see what the titles of their essays are, you get, you know, perhaps a sense of the types of things this applicant is interested in researching. And then, yes, of course, we get it broken down incrementally. What we would have seen on the transcript is only the course grade at the end, not, you know, the variation in topic or the progression throughout the course.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the next hand I see is Samantha.
Hi. So I just had a quick question. I'm not sure if you're gonna have the answer. It's kind of odd, but I was thinking somebody else might have the same issue as me. I was looking at my academic summary report, and my social security number on there is incorrect.
Oh.
And I don't know how that would happen, or if I just call LSAC to figure that out, or what.
You can call LSAC, and they have their protocols to how to update that. I would imagine it's just a typo somewhere, maybe when you were entering something.
But if it's on the academic summary report, that's coming from my transcript, correct?
Not all transcripts have social security numbers, especially these days. Usually there's like a student ID number that's on there instead. So there's another place that you enter your own social. That could have been it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Christopher.
Hi, yeah, so I guess the question I have after just looking at the tips for choosing recommenders is, what is the best way to kind of pick somebody who you know will be in that middle ground of speaking to your accomplishments, but also, and still doing it in the best, in the most effective emotional tone, without it kind of, you know, crossing that line into just being like too overly emotional?
You know, I think going back to Nancy's comment about how emotion can be effective, I think it really just comes, you know, from two things. I think it may be that particular person's writing style, right? Everybody's is different. But I think it probably is more closely tied to how strongly they really believe this is a good pathway for you and how much they want to endorse it. So I think if you want to make sure that that they, I don't know if you want them to be more emotional or less emotional, but you know, you can only really kind of give them as much guidance as is professional. You know, give them a copy of your resume, give them a copy of your personal statement, or at least a pretty good draft of it. Ask them to mention certain things. If they really feel strongly about your candidacy, it's probably going to come through. And, you know, I wouldn't worry about it being too emotional per se.